Hello again. Welcome back to our discussion of React Native. So, in the last few videos, we got our app up and running. We've got, React Native working. We've built an app with using some of the built-in components like the flat list, text, and view. Let's talk about it now, right? And kind of go back and review all the things that we've done, right? Um, so React Native is, we write the code in JavaScript and we use the React paradigm and we create components and JSX and things like that. But the difference is that the React Native components are not the web components. So we don't use the div and the h1 and things like that, but instead we use these built-in components like safe area view, flat list, text, and status bar, right? Um, and we have to use those because they get translated through Babel into native code. Okay, so they get translated to native code, right? So that brings up the question then, um, you know, what native components are available to us? Like which native components can we use? So let's take a look at that and find some new components that we can add to our project. So I'm gonna go to the browser here, and I'm going to open up my browser window and I'm going to search for React Native. Okay, so I'm looking for reactnative.dev, which is their homepage, right? So I'm going to go here. It says React Native, learn once, write anywhere. Okay, and we have some docs here at the top, and you can click on this and it'll give you, the basics, and it'll tell you how to set up your project, how to handle text input, how to create a scroll view and a list view. And we did some of these things, right? And there's some more information down there. And then there's this link here that says components. So I'm going to go to components, and this shows us a list of all the components that are available. Okay. So, the limit with React Native is that if there isn't a component for something, we probably can't do it, right? I mean, if it's something that can be made from components that exist, then that's fine, right? Because we can take those components and put them together into a component that we create, and that works. But if there's some feature of the phone or some functionality that we need that isn't contained in a component somewhere, then we can't do that. You can write your own components, and the React Native team is creating new components all the time, and they're adding them to their list here. But if something doesn't exist here, we can't do it. So that's probably the biggest limitation to React Native, okay? So that said, what components do they supply? Well, they have a lot of components, right? So we've got activity indicator, button, flat list, image background, keyboard avoiding view, modal, pressable, says it's new, right? Refresh control, scroll view, section list, status bar, switch, right? There's a whole bunch of these here. Now, at the bottom, there's a list that says iOS components and another one called Android components, right? So you got Android and iOS components here. So in some cases, there's components that are only available on Android or only available on iOS. Okay, and that's because there's some features that are very specific to those environments, and they actually don't exist on the other environment, right? So a majority of the components are universal; they work on both, but a few of the components only work on one environment or the other. Okay. For right now, let's focus on components that work on both environments, right? Like the common components, okay? And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to solve another problem with our app. So, our app has like a lot of animals in it, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to search this list, right? So I'd like to be able to type in Alaskan and then get Alaskan Malamute, right, from my search list, right? Or type in American and they get American Bulldog and American English Coonhound and all the animals, American Eskimo dog, right? So that would make our app a little more useful, right? So maybe we need a search field, right? So if you recall, React has a special pattern that we use for input elements, and we're going to have to implement that same pattern here. right? And also, if you recall, that pattern requires using state, and that's something that we haven't done with our native components. So let's give that a try, right? So the first thing I want to do is I want to look up an input element, right? So React Native provides a couple of these. The most common one is the text input. So I have it here in the sidebar, text input, right? So I'll click on that, and when I go into the docs, it's going to show me, a description of the component, foundational component for inputting text into your app via the keyboard, right? And then down here it says the most basic case is to plop down a text input and describe the text on change, right? And then they give us some sample code here. So here's a sample of the text input live and in use, and you can test this on your device. You can test it on iOS, Android, or on the web. Okay, so you can actually see this live. Um, Here's another example of a text input with multi-line. Okay, um, and then here's a reference. So the text input is a component, and components take props. So here are the props that it takes. So it takes allow font scaling, auto capitalize, right? So font scaling is a Boolean, it's not required. Auto capitalize is an enum, so it can be one of these 4 values and it's not required. Autocomplete, you can set the value to off, username, password, blah, blah, blah. And so here it's an enum with these values, right? Oh, it looks like this is only available on Android, I guess, right? Platform Android. Autocorrect, right? Autofocus, on blur. There's a whole bunch of these, right? So you have to read through these. Most of these are not required, right? Wait, clear on focus. I guess that means when you tap on the field, right? And then, oh, that's only available on iOS, right? So let's keep going through this, right? So I'm not going to read all these, but you can read through these, right? I want to get to this section down at the bottom here, right? And keyboard type. Usually at the bottom, what I'm looking for is usually at the bottom, they'll give us a list of CSS properties that that your component will work with, right? So I'm just looking for that section here. Somewhere down here, spell check, text. Wow, this guy has a lot of properties, right? Oh, style. So at the very bottom, there's a section called style, and then it tells me which style properties you're allowed to use. Okay, so now remember, the other difference with native components is that they're not HTML. And React Native is using our style sheet, right? And we're using styles, but the native components are written in native code, so they're not HTML. So it's not using the browser, it's not using regular CSS. But what the native developers have done is they've implemented some of the CSS properties, some of the web CSS properties, and they've implemented them in the context of the native component, right? So it's showing me here what styles I can use, right? So it says, note, not all styles are supported. An incomplete list of what is not supported includes some of these, right? And then it kind of gives me some more values down here, okay? So, and then there's some methods that you can call on this thing. So I point the styles out because it's important, to know which ones don't work, because sometimes you'll try something and it doesn't work. So keep an eye on that for all the components. So let's use our text input, right? So the deal here with the text input, and it works a little differently than the input in HTML, okay? It takes the onChange text property or prop, and then you just pass in a function, and instead of receiving an event object, it just gives you the text that was changed. So it gives you the new text. So we can simplify this with an input element in the browser. We actually get an event object, and the text is a property on that object. With this, we're just going to get the text directly. So you can just actually put the setter function for your value into this as the value for this property, right? So let's give that a try, right? So I'm going to switch back to my editor here. And I'm actually going to switch back to the cats list too, because it'll be fewer animals and the lists will be a little bit shorter, right? So it'll be a little easier to scroll through this one, okay? So I switch this from my data on my flat list to cats, right? And if I look at right now I'm in app.js, and if I look at the component, I have safe area view, so that's helping us avoid the status bar and the notch. And then I have a view here, so this is my container for the whole list. And then I have a flat list inside that view, and then I have this status bar right here, right? So the status bar is just controlling how the status bar looks. I'm actually not super familiar with this one, but what I think you can just put this anywhere. So I'm actually going to put it outside here. Or actually, you know what? I kind of feel like maybe it would make more sense to put it at the top, because that's where the status bar appears, right? So maybe that'll be a little better. So maybe we'll do that, right? Okay, so now let's input our text input. Okay, so I'm going to get the text input here, and I'm importing that from React Native. And now let's use our text input. It's going to be a little hard to see at first because it doesn't have any styles. So if I add the text input here, you can't really see it, but it's at the bottom here. Like, it's very tiny. Like, hello, I'm down here. Let me type that. Hello, I'm down here. Okay, right? So I'm down at the very bottom there. And we can change that by setting some styles on this. We might even wrap it in a container view and then give that view some styles to set, padding or margin or whatever, right? Right now, let's just go with this. And it's just a single tag. It doesn't have any child elements, so we don't use a closing tag. We just use a self-closing, like the slash at the end, right? So it has some properties. It has placeholder, just like your HTML element. So I'll say my placeholder will be search, right? And so I see, actually I got some text in there. If I get rid of the text, it will, click in here. If I get rid of the text, it'll show the placeholder value, right? So it says search down there, okay? I know it's a little hard to see. We'll have to put a style on it. Let's actually do that, right? I've been putting that off. Let's say style, and then we'll put styles, oops, I did two S's, styles dot search, right? And then I'll have to set a style for search at the bottom here, so I'll put it in my style object. Let's call this search colon, and then let's say font size of 24. I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of big enough. Maybe it needs to be a little bit bigger, maybe a little padding too, right? Let's do this. Let's do padding of 10. I don't know. Right? Yes, yeah, so that's a little better. We could bring that up a little bit from the bottom, but for right now, I think that that'll do. Okay, so I can type in there now, okay? Okay, so how are we going to work with the search? Well, first of all, I need to keep the search value in a variable. This is the same method you used with React in the web, okay? So we always hold the value that you input on a state variable. So I'm going to go to React at the top here, and I'm going to input or import use state, okay? So I'll get use state. So I got use state up here, and then inside my component function, I'm going to declare a state variable and a setter function. So I'll say use state, and the default value will be the empty string. And I'm going to call it search as the name of the variable, and I'm going to do set search as the name of my setter function. Okay? And in the text input down here, I'm going to add, on change text, okay? And this wants a function that will receive the new text. So I'm going to put set search here, okay? And then the value that's displayed in the input is going to be the search value, okay? So with this in place, anytime I type into the text input, the value will be stored on this search variable, and I can use that somewhere else inside my code. So, otherwise, as I type here, I should be able to just type into the field and I could search for American, whatever, curl or whatever cat, right? So Abyssinian, right? Okay. So now let's get the search to work. So to get the search to work, we need to filter the data list, right? We need to filter the data list so it doesn't include the cats that don't match the search or the breeds that don't match that name, okay? So there's a couple ways to do this. It might be a little awkward to do it here. I think it'll work, so we might want to move that out here, but for right now, we'll do it right here. So I'm going to say dot, and then I'm going to say filter. And my filter function is going to receive an item. That's one of the cats from the list, right? And we are going to return true if we're going to keep that cat and false if we're not going to keep it, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say item.breed. So that's the name of the cat. It should be the name that we see up here, right? Let's go get some new cats. So it should be like Balinese or Bengal cats or Burnham, right? Okay. And what I want to do is I want to say, hey, does that name include? Does it include or includes? I think it's include, right? I think it's includes. Yeah. I'm going to say breed includes, and then I want to put my search term. Okay. So when I do this, the default search term is the empty string, and all these strings contain the empty string, so they're included. If I type in a, oops, wait, I've got to type into the field here, not into my code. Let's type in a. Now this is all the cats that contain an A in their name, and actually an uppercase A, because I typed uppercase. Let's type uppercase B. So these are all the cats that start with an uppercase B. Let's filter that down to cats that start with a B-O. So there's Pixie Bob, Japanese Bobtail, and Bombay, right? So, anyway, so that kind of gets us started. We have our search working here. You can style this, right? So give this some styles. You could wrap it in a div and put a little margin or padding or a little bit of space around it. You could put another text object next to it so it said search, right? We could put a button on the other side maybe so you could tap it. Right now it's just working when you type. Here's a note though. So, and here's maybe a challenge for you, right? Is right now when I search, if I do B-O, like lowercase b, actually for some reason it wants to uppercase that B all the time. That's so frustrating. It just automatically uppercases every time. I was going to say, like, if we search for lowercase b, it's not going to find Bengal cats because the B is uppercase. So the search for us is going to be case sensitive, right? So my challenge to you would be to make this non-case sensitive, even though actually it's kind of always uppercasing the first letter. That's probably an option in the text input, right? It's probably one of those options that it has. So, you could look that up and figure out how to turn that off, okay? Anyway, so I'll leave this video off here, and you can try and get the search working. You can style the text input right here. And like I said, you might even make a view as a wrapper around it. And that might be something that makes it a little easier to position and set the spacing around that view. Okay, so it would look something like this, and then you could add a style to it, right? So anyway, I'll leave this off for you, and you can continue working on your project. Okay, and thanks again for watching.